Years ago, a friend of mine showed me a website that's always stuck with me. www.dumblaws.com. It lists reportedly real laws from every state that are, shall we say, awkward or maybe a little out of date or impractical to enforce or just plain foolish. Having said that, and for your listening pleasure, here is a list of some of our legislators' less than finest moments. In Michigan, it is illegal for a woman to cut her own hair without her husband's permission. Gentlemen, I wouldn't even go there. However, it is legal for a robber to sue you if he or she gets hurt while breaking into your home and trying to steal your stuff. In the city of Detroit, it is illegal for a man to scowl at his wife on Sundays. In Harper Woods, it is illegal to paint sparrows to look like parakeets and then try and sell them. In Kalamazoo, it is illegal to serenade your girlfriend. And in Rochester, home of Oakland University, all bathing suits have to be inspected before going out in public by the chief of police. Now, you have to wonder what happened to prompt such laws. Did they make sense at one time and then become obsolete? Or did someone, maybe even with the best of intentions, do something that got out of hand? In our gospel lesson today, Jesus runs right into one such law. He heals a woman on the Sabbath and is immediately taken to task by the leader of the synagogue. Now, my first response to the leader of the synagogue is to say, how could you be so uncompassionate? This woman has been stooped over, suffering for 18 years. She needs healing. She needs something that only Jesus could do for her. And Jesus does it in what seems like spur-of-the-moment fashion. Notice, unlike other healing stories, this person didn't ask to be healed. Jesus just sees her need, touches her, and responds. But the synagogue leader, a religious man who presumably cared about people, had only this to say: there are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath. Talk about a real stick in the mud. If there were ever someone who doesn't get it, it seems like this would be the guy. This woman was thrilled at her newfound freedom. The crowd, they share in her joy. But all the synagogue leader could say was basically, why couldn't you come back any other day of the week? Now, to be fair to him, he does have a point. He's just trying to be faithful. He's trying to follow his own understanding of what it meant to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Not to sound cruel, but Jesus could have healed this woman the next day. She wasn't going anywhere, and she'd already put up with her infirmity for 18 years. So really, what's one more day? And since Sabbath regulations prohibited traveling, it meant that Jesus himself couldn't travel. And so he'd still be in town the next day to heal her if he wanted to. Besides, the synagogue leader was responsible for making sure that people in town observed the law. He had a job to do, and he was trying his very best to do it. It's like he's a local police officer on traffic patrol, and Jesus is speeding down Main Street doing 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. What's he supposed to do? Let him go by? As best the synagogue leader could tell, Jesus was deliberately violating the law, and quite unnecessarily at that, which made him guilty of dishonoring the Sabbath, and even more importantly, of dishonoring God. And yet what the synagogue leader failed to understand is that the law is more than a list of prohibitions. It's an opportunity to recognize and even to extend the grace of God. God graciously gives us all a day of rest to prepare for the week ahead. That's an especially important thing for us to remember in today's world. That a Sabbath is first and foremost a gift. And so busying yourself too much on your day of rest is basically saying no thank you to God's gift. Think about that for a moment. And then go back in time with me to those days when you hopefully had to memorize the Ten Commandments. Because when we memorize them, we usually memorize them out of Exodus chapter 20. The list is slightly shorter, so that's generally the preferred option. And there it says, when it comes to remembering the Sabbath day, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall do no work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and God rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. But you know, the Ten Commandments don't only appear in Exodus chapter 20. They're also given by Moses again to the people right as they are about to enter the promised land in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And wouldn't you know, Moses adds one important line to the Ten Commandments, to one commandment in particular. Care to guess which one? He adds the line, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So the Sabbath isn't just about worshiping and honoring God. It's also about freedom, the freedom that God gives us. It's a day when we can be freed from want, freed from commercial gain, freed from self-interest, freed from the need to accumulate more and more stuff. In short, it's a day when we can forget about what the world tells us we have to do and instead give thanks to God for what God has already given us. Just like the Sabbath was supposed to remind the Israelites who freed them from slavery, the Sabbath is to remind us who frees us from sin and death. The Sabbath reminds us who and whose we are. That's what makes Jesus' actions toward this woman a fulfillment of the law instead of a rejection of it. By straightening her back, this woman's back, Jesus frees this woman from her physical ailment. And that was the amazing first half of the miracle. The other half of the miracle was when Jesus' actions bring the entire crowd and her back into community. Luke ends this story with the words, and the people were delighted with all the wonderful things that he was doing. Jesus not only cured this woman from her ailment, he transformed the entire community into one that rejoiced at what God was doing. He heals the woman, but even more so, he heals the crowd by making it possible for her to live again in the community as a full member of it. The synagogue leader, he needed someone to free him from the dumb law that he had constructed for other people to live by. Someone to tell him that he needed to lace his opinions with a little bit of humanity, a little bit of charity, a little bit of grace. So Jesus does this by challenging him to see the law not as a list of do's and don'ts, but as a life-giving instrument, as an opportunity for showing compassion and love. Luther gets at this in his explanation of the 8th commandment in the Small Catechism. In response to the command not to bear false witness against your neighbor, Luther goes a little bit farther. He takes it one step farther and says, we are to fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbors, betray or slander them, or destroy their reputations. Instead, we are to come to their defense, to speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. Here, Jesus invites everyone there that day to see his act of healing in the best possible light. And I think that's both the promise and the challenge for us today. Because it's not simply an invitation to find freedom in Sabbath rest. It's also a call for us to see others' actions in the best possible light. That doesn't mean that we need to be naive or Pollyannish, but in a world that seems increasingly polarized and even more quick to judge, ask yourself, how can I show more love, more charity, more grace for people with whom I disagree? Whether they be political opponents, neighbors down the street, or even members of your own family. So before you post a comment online that disparages someone else, or say something harsh to a coworker, ask yourself, am I seeing their actions in the best possible light? When we do that, when we extend more love and charity and grace to others, we become more like Jesus and less like the synagogue leader. When we do that, we are the ones who are truly freed. We are the ones who will find rest for our souls. Amen.